Hello everybody, Erin here, and today I am going to talk about the first two books that I have read from the CBC Canada Reads Longlist. For these two books, I have chosen, my first two choices from the list were Scarborough by Catherine Hernandez and Seven Fallen Feathers. That is by Tanya Talaga? I'll put a cover of that up here and you'll, get a better idea of, wow, bad preparation. So I'll start by talking about the one book I actually have here, and that is Scarborough. This book is written, as I said, by Catherine, actually I should back up a second. This year, CBC Canada Reads, the long list was chosen with the theme of one book to make you think or one book to change your mind. Either way, it's kind of, you understand where they're going with that. So basically, it's looking at people who are marginalized in our society. There are, I think, 15 books on the long list. I did do a video about that a week ago or so. I will link to that below so you can see all of the books on the long list. But first, I'm going to talk about Catherine Hernandez as an author. She is a queer theater practitioner and author. She has written children's books, she has written plays, and she is also the artistic director of Sulong Theatre for Women of Color. And she actually lives in Scarborough, Ontario. So she's talking about an area that she is familiar with. I have seen other reviews of this book. Remembered Reads and I were actually chatting about it after I posted the long list, and her biggest concern with the book was that it isn't really a reflection of Scarborough, it's a reflection of one area of Scarborough. Now, I'm not familiar with Scarborough. I can't tell you whether or not it's an accurate depiction of any area in Scarborough, and I'm not even sure how big Scarborough is. So for me, this was a good introduction to Scarborough. Well, maybe not an introduction, a good look at a part of Scarborough. And it is very focused on a single community in Scarborough. And in that community, it focuses on three families and some of their connections. So all three of these families are connected through the children. The three children know each other. There's a native girl, there's a Vietnamese boy, and there's a white girl. Now, they have various connections through the books. The Indigenous girl and the Vietnamese boy are actually very good friends, and the white girl is a brand new student at the school because her mother basically abandoned her to her father, and her father is scrambling to try to get her into school and take proper care of her. All three families suffer from poverty, and all three families have other challenges going on, whether it's racism or just other situations going on. Racism kind of plays a bigger role in the fact that, you know, you've got this combination of three different races, and one of them being white and the other two being marginalized, like races that are typically marginalized. And you follow these families and these children through the story, and I enjoyed it. I thought it was a really good look at whether it's Scarborough specific or any other large city in this country. I mean, you're going to have that situation with poverty, with multiple races living together, and just these kind of conflicts. Some of the characters are less sympathetic than others, for lack of a better term, but there are racists in this book, and one is extremely racist, and he does not like pretty much anyone that he interacts with because of the neighborhood he lives in. He's white, and he pretty much doesn't like anyone who isn't white. Yeah, so it's a very detailed look at these characters, and I found when I was reading it, at times I felt distance from the characters, and I don't know if it was because in my head I was like, this is an Ontario thing. I don't live in Ontario. Or if it was more related to the fact that because of the shit, like, you get different narrative from different people, I felt like there was that distance maybe because of that. But then at the end of the book, I put the book down and I didn't pick up another book because it was like I pretty much stayed up a little bit to read it before, instead of going to bed to finish it. And I found that I was disturbed emotionally by it. I actually started crying, and my husband was like, "Are you okay?" Because it's not normal for me to cry before I go to bed. And I said, I tried to explain this to him, like the book was sad. The book was heartbreaking in places, but as I was reading it, I didn't feel heartbroken. But when I finished reading it, I felt hopeless. And I thought that was really interesting, like this distance from the story throughout the book, but at the end, this feeling of, that's horrible, that's awful, but there's nothing I can do to help. There's nothing I can do to change things. I can be who I am and do, affect my small little world and try to make people understand, but I can't do any more than that. And I can't solve the problems for these individual people. I will never meet these individual people. I mean, first of all, they're fictional. That's the first problem. But second, even if they were real, I mean, they're in Ontario, I'm in Alberta. There's that it's so hard to explain. But at the end of the book, I felt hopeless. I felt like I can't undo the past. I can't change the way other people look at people who are different, and I can't change the future. That's one of the first books that has ever kind of had that effect on me. When I was done reading it, I looked at it and I went, huh. So I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 5 stars. And it is, I think, an excellent choice. I hope it makes it to the shortlist, which will be announced later this week. And I highly recommend reading this if you want just even a bit of an idea of what goes on. It doesn't take a look at the larger problems. It's a very close and in-depth look at how it affects individuals. So the other book that I read for this challenge was 7 Fallen Feathers by Tanya Talaga. Talaga or Talaga? I should really have looked that up before I got this far. And this book is about, it's another in-depth look at a region. It's the Thunder Bay region, the city of Thunder Bay in Canada, in Ontario, and the native or the indigenous communities that are around that area. Thunder Bay is a fairly remote community. It's up on, I think it's Hudson's Bay. It's up fairly far north in Canada. Wow, good knowledge of my geography. And it's a remote community. It is a city. It's a divided city where there's the white community and there's the indigenous community. And this city is also had in the past, it had residential schools, which I'm not going to really get into because residential schools are a huge part of Canada's history, and you can really look that up on your own and find out about them, but they're horrible. Horrifying things happened as a result of the residential schools. For me, 7 Fallen Feathers was a tough read because none of us like facing the crappy things in our history. And because it deals with racism and it deals with residential schools, this book is hard to read as a white person. So it tells the stories of Indigenous communities in Northern Ontario and their struggle for equality. And this comes down to equality in education, equality in community services, just availability of groceries. Like if you want to see a food desert, you need to look at northern communities who are paying 3 or 4 times what I would pay for a jug of milk in the store. They pay 3 or 4 times that. And a lot of cases, they have no income. They have, there's nothing for them. They live on subsistence, fishing and hunting, and money from the government, because that's what the situation is. That's the community, that's the culture that we've created for them. In these cases, these communities are too small for high schools. So they'll have elementary schools, and then once the kids get to junior high and senior high, they're sent off to other communities to go to school. And the story focuses on 2 of these communities, but there are 2 of these schooling areas, and the major one is in Thunder Bay. So when people send their children to Thunder Bay to go to high school, which is typically the senior high, some of them start in grade like 8 or 9, but for most of them it's grade 10, 11, 12. They send their kids there. They're away from home. They're boarded at another, they're boarded at someone's house. And in a lot of cases, these people are boarding, for multiple students. They're not just boarding one or two, they're boarding 4 or 5 or 6 students. And they can't necessarily, they're not acting as parents, right? So they are research. They do minimal research into these homes to make sure that they're not, criminals or whatever. They're going to treat the children well. In a lot of cases, they're staying with family members, so cousins or aunts or uncles, brothers, sisters, other people from their reserves that they know. They may be staying with them. And it's interesting that this school is meant, I don't remember the name of the school, but it is meant for students from out of town. So one of the rules is you must be boarding with someone to go to the school. And this actually affected one of the students, one of the boys that went missing. His dad moved with him to Thunder Bay because his son didn't want to go there alone. And when he did, his son was not eligible to attend that school. So he actually had to attend a different high school. And he did quite well at this other high school, which was for the Thunder Bay residents. And what happens is these kids, they go into this environment, and in a lot of cases, it's the first time they've lived away from home. And they're going from a super small community where everything's really expensive and they have no real temptations, right, into a city where everything's available 24 hours, and there are drug dealers, and there's gangs, and there's people there that really don't have their best, wishes, like their best intentions at heart, right? So you're looking at this situation, and it's a recipe for disaster for any culture. If you took, well, if you think about it, like I know people that from my high school that left home and went to play hockey when they were in high school, so grade 9 or 10. And in a lot of cases, their parents went with them. They moved with them because you don't want to leave your kids. Like, it's just not a good environment, right? You don't have any control anymore. And the people that are looking after them aren't going to act as parents, as I said. So these kids are left in these situations. And unfortunately, because of the racism in Thunder Bay, the police aren't always going to be doing their best to look out for these kids. And there's that they've got this preconceived notion, and in a lot of, like in the one case, the child was missing, or the boy was missing for a couple days before the police would even investigate. They kept telling the boarding family, he'll come back, he's just out on a bender. That's what, he's out drinking somewhere. When he sobers up, he'll come home. And that's horrifying. I can't imagine anybody's parent, or even, like in this case, guardian, being told that. They were responsible. They reported it to the police that this boy, this teenager was missing, and it's brushed off. And a lot of the cases, the investigations into these deaths are just brushed off as fell into the river, went swimming in November, which is ridiculous, And so you can see where there's a lot of, I shouldn't go too far down this path, but so you can see where the racism it plays a part. But the author tells us 7 different stories of 7 different children who have died, and they've all died, I shouldn't say in different ways, but there are different circumstances around most of the deaths. And she treats each of the individuals as individuals. She doesn't group them all together. She doesn't say, this exactly like, but she gives you the details about the person involved, about their family. You get to know a lot of people in the community, and you see how the people at this school are really working extremely hard to try to protect the children, but they're on their own. They have no support from the community as a whole. When you look at public services. So I thought it was a really interesting book. I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars. And the reason I took a star off was because in some cases I felt like the author wanted to come to a specific conclusion. And she would be extremely specific about the actions or inaction of white people. But when it came to sometimes the actions of the Native community, it would suddenly get vague. Somebody's mother showed up a few days later. Yet, it took this many hours before the police actually filed a missing persons report. So there was, I don't really want to call it a lack of balance, because honestly, in this situation, the lack of balance is understood. I can't imagine the anger, the helplessness, the hopelessness that these people feel watching their communities be treated this way. But at the same time, I just felt like I wished the author had been a little bit more honest about the goals for the book. And it would have made me read it a little better without sometimes, when things were happening, question why she worded things a certain way, or why she focused so much on this aspect, but kind of passed over this part. So that was my one concern with that, but I still gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I don't know if I would expect to see this one on the short list, but I've only read 2 books out of the entire 15, so I don't know. It's hard for me to say whether or not this would be on the short list, but or that would be on the short list. So there you go. Those are the first 2 books that I have read for the Canada Reads long list, and I'm going to be moving forward on those again in February, hoping to read 1 or 2 of them in February. I'm not going to be finishing the long list even before the awards announced, but I'm hoping to get some way through it. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. Leave a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. And other than that, I'll talk to you soon. Bye.